Andrew Jackson, the seventh President of the United States, was a self-proclaimed champion of the common man, stemming from his experience as a general.
Andrew Jackson was, regarded as a national hero.
And that was in large part due to his role as a general in the victory of the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812.
As president, we saw a transformation where some critics regarded this former war hero as some sort of a military tyrant under the name of King Andrew I.
So did this romantic figure really captivate the common man and extend Jeffersonian democracy? Or did this tyrant simply expand the power of the presidency? Jackson was born in the Carolinas to a small farm in 1767 and received limited education as a child. As a young teen, he fought in the Revolutionary War. Later, Jackson studied law in Tennessee and prospered enough to buy slaves. Jackson received national attention upon his service in the War of 1812 and soon joined the Senate before a futile attempt at presidency in 1824.
You know, this wasn't your typical president. He wasn't a very good speller, he had a very limited education, and he was the first president to come from a western state. Also, he was described as being very hot-headed,
even killing Charles Dickinson in a duel that began over a minor misunderstanding.
Jackson's origins really had a large influence on his politics. He hated the British
due to his experience as a captive during the American Revolution.
In Jackson's presidential campaign of 1828, Van Buren attempted to establish him as a common man. Old Hickory, as Jackson was referred to, represented the quintessence of a self-made man or a natural aristocrat. Jackson expressed the Democrats' goal as equality among the people in the rights conferred by government.
Jackson made an effort to express his Jeffersonian ideals by giving common people more of a say in government and by opposing rigid social distinctions, which ultimately conferred to Jeffersonian democracy.
A major proponent of Jackson's policy of office holders involved the spoils system, a policy borrowed by Van Buren, and rotation in office. The spoils system favored appointing friends and other advocates as officials upon winning elections. This idea, coupled with the discouragement of property in office or significantly long terms, ensured short office stints for positions Jackson had control over.
This seemingly supported Jeffersonian democracy, as it allowed more interest to be expressed in government. However, Jackson only appointed advocates of his policies, thereby expanding the power of the president and by reducing his opposition.
When Andrew Jackson first took office in 1829, his official cabinet was very argumentative and ineffectual due to the fierce rivalry between Vice President John Calhoun and Secretary of State Martin Van Buren. Soon, Jackson turned to an unofficial group of trusted friends and advisors until Jackson requested the resignations of all original cabinet members in 1831.
In Jeffersonian democracy, government is created to express the wills of the people. Jackson undermined this by seeking advice more so from his kitchen cabinet rather than elected government officials.
In 1832, when high tariff congressmen reenacted the Tariff of Abominations, South Carolina adopted an ordinance of nullification on the tariff and threatened to secede from the Union. South Carolina's arguments rested in the South Carolina Exposition, written by John C. Calhoun, that gave states a right to interpret rulings to their own interests. Jackson maintained that the federal government had a right to establish a tariff and saw South Carolina's actions as treason. He passed a military force bill that allowed Jackson to compel the state's obedience. However, Jackson did lower tariff rates over the next decade.
Going against the ideals of Jeffersonian democracy, Andrew Jackson's military force bill gave too much power to the federal government, which lessened the sovereignty of the states that was clearly expressed in the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which was co-written by Thomas Jefferson himself. Furthermore, Andrew Jackson's immediate reaction to want to use military force can be attributed to his experience as a general.
1832, when Henry Clay proposed a re-extension bill for the National Bank Charter, Jackson vetoed the bill, citing Jefferson's reasoning and his own common man background as the bank promoted the advancement of the few at the expense of farmers, mechanics, and laborers. Later, when Jackson was re-elected as president, he had Treasurer Taney transfer the funds from the National Bank to state banks and prevented its renewal.
Although closing the federal bank was an idea expressed by Jefferson himself, the tyrannical way in which Jackson went about doing so was probably illegal and extremely unconstitutional, even garnering him a censure.
Echoing the voices of the South and Midwest, Jackson issued the Indian Removal Act of 1830 to move Cherokees and other Indians away from the Southwest and into present-day Oklahoma. Despite Marshall and the Supreme Court declaring that the government could not have extension of law over the Indians, Jackson still forced the relocation in a journey known as the Trail of Tears.
Jackson, going against the rulings of Marshall Court, brought a new power to the presidency that was never seen before, as he acted arbitrarily of the other two branches of government.
Andrew Jackson's extreme opposition of Native Americans was due in large part to his hatred of them as a farmer in Tennessee.
In 1831, after France viewed Jackson's demands for the immediate repayment of Napoleonic destruction of American shipment, France was insulted and close to war. Nevertheless, Britain convinced France to pay without conflict. Also, in 1835, Jackson was in a long journey to buy Texas. Several Americans mounted a revolt, annexing Texas to the United States. Though Jackson refused to endorse these actions, the events increased distrust between Mexico and the United States. Also, Jackson mounted a series of wars against the Seminoles in Florida.
Jackson's foreign policy did not necessarily comply with the Jeffersonian ideals of limited government and isolationism. Furthermore, his military background is now seen as tyrannical due to his multiple near-war experiences.
One of Jackson's highest priorities as president was destroying Henry Clay's American systems and other government-sponsored plans for national economic development. In 1830 alone, he vetoed 4 internal improvement bills, including an extension of the national road, as it infringed on the power of the states.
By destroying Henry Clay's American system, Jackson embraced Jeffersonian democracy by eliminating the power of the federal government. It is also of note that the American system was a policy supported by members of the Northern aristocracy, whom Jackson began to hate as he lived in the West.
So did this president really expand Jeffersonian democracy as he was a champion of the average man, or expand the power of the presidency at the expense of minority groups?
Andrew Jackson tried to follow in the footsteps of Thomas Jefferson as best as he could, by opposing rigid social distinctions, by promoting democratic equality through suffrage, and he was even a farmer, which supported Jefferson's vision of an agrarian democracy.
However, his methods of doing so brought an unconstitutional amount of power to the presidency that resembled more so that of a tyrant rather than a champion of the average man.